Good to have everybody on this fine day. And I don't know about you, but I'm still kind of charged up about all of the events going on in the country, hither, thither, and yon. So there's a lot for us to pray for and talk about. But nonetheless, I'm gonna go ahead and start. We're still talking about the complete sayings of Jesus, and we're coming from the 3rd chapter of that particular book. And the scripture, for those that don't have the book, is going to be Luke, the 2nd chapter, verses 40 through 52. Luke, the 2nd chapter, verses 40 through 52. And so it says, the child grew and waxed strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. When Jesus was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. They fulfilled the days, and as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. They, supposing him to have been in the company, went a day's journey, and then they sought him among their kinsfolk and acquaintance. When they found him not, they turned back to Jerusalem seeking him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking questions. All that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. His mother said to him, "Son, why hast thou dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee sorrowing." Jesus said unto them, "How is it that ye sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business?" Now here we have the first recorded words of Jesus actually speaking. And they understood not. He went down with them to Nazareth and was subject unto them. But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and with favor with God and man. In those days, I'm going into 4 there. Okay, so that's it right there. So here we have Jesus at the age of 12. We're looking at the age, the year they have recorded as AD 8. AD 8. And we're in Nazareth in Jerusalem. So I love this passage of scripture because, like I said, for years and years and years and years, I always heard, well, let me put it like this. I never heard the church address any negativity that Jesus at the age of 12 went off by himself and was not found. When they realized they didn't have him, they searched for him for 3 days. Now, in today's days and times, they would have been, oh my God, especially in 2020, you'd have child abuse, neglect, and everything else when you ain't got your child for 3 whole days plus. And it's amazing to me, of course, different culture, different time. Sometimes people have said, why and how in the world did they go so far into a journey and not know Jesus was with them? But as was the custom in that day, they did travel in caravans and large groups. And so even as you note, they said they looked every place that they could amongst themselves, and then they went to the kinsfolk because it wasn't uncommon for them to travel together. It kind of puts me in mind even more so then than now. But when we were growing up, y'all know how when we would take trips going to White Cloud, every space in the car had a body in it. You might have one car, and if we go to Uncle Walt, my uncle might have 15, 16 folks get out of that one car because they would be just stacked in there. And I mean, like roaches. You had your first row elapsed that got an actual seat. Mm-hmm. Then you had your next row that was sitting on top. Mm-hmm. So Rashida's looking at, you have no point of reference to that, do you, Rashida? You too young to remember those days, but I remember those days. So if you expand it even to centuries before, when they actually were going in large caravans, it makes sense. And even if I go from that standpoint, you know how when we get to where we were going, it might be if it was a large group, if the whole church was traveling, you may not be in your parents' car. You
That's
might
right.
be in somebody else's car, you
Right.
know.
Somebody where you could fit on their lap.
Wherever your little body could fit, that's whose car you got in. And at the end of the day, you might get to the location and your parents, even in that small of a scenario, might be like, now which car was Regina in? And they have to look amongst the cars to see where are you at. So when I think about, again, that question that a lot of people are like, how in the world did they get that far away from Jesus and not know that he was with them? So, you know, that's my first takeaway on the beginning of that story. Anybody else have anything else you want to add to that? Anybody? So here we have this 12-year-old boy. Now, mind you, 12-year-old for a Jewish child would be an age of when they would be having their bar mitzvah or bar mitzvah. What's the female version?
Bat mitzvah.
So in some cultures, that would be like the coming of age. And so even though that's awful young to us, I mean, if you stop and think about it, if we unleash 12-year-olds on the United States of America as adults in these days and times, can you imagine what kind of world we would be in? But yet and still, his parents still had responsibility for him.
Right.
So we find Jesus being a little boy. And I want us to be attuned to that, because I think when we start talking about spiritual things, our spirits are fully mature. But we in the physiological have to grow. As well, I want us to understand that even in our understanding, in our theology, in our doctrines, whatever, you know, you may start off at point A, but more than likely, you're not going to end up at point A. You will have developed, I hope you will have developed over the span of time, so that what you initially thought and felt, you've grown and matured into something new and improved, not necessarily saying that the first part was wrong. It was just a part of your development until you could develop to another level. Well, we see a 12-year-old wanting to be a stud. Not so much in the muscular way of I'm out here flexing my physical muscles, but I'm out here flexing my mental and scholastic and philosophical and theological muscles. So I'm here in the synagogue and I'm impressing folks.
Right.
I've got the scribes, the Pharisees, I've got the lawyers, I've got everybody that is somebody, and I'm just wowing them with my immense knowledge. And I imagine for a 12-year-old boy, that felt pretty good. So here we have, in the meantime, his mother and Joseph realize that he's not in the midst. And oh my God, for 3 days, they're hunting. And I can only imagine, like it said, when she found him, why would you do that to us? Why would you do that to us? You know, here we are, and obviously no level of communication. My mom gonna stay behind, but let's be real. If I think back to my own adulthood and my growth, didn't we eventually get to, even before we were probably fully mature, didn't we get to a phase and a place where we wasn't all about telling mom and daddy everywhere we were going?
Yeah. But usually that wasn't without correction.
Yes.
Exactly. Now, I on the flip side, there is a point in time where you should be old enough and mature enough that you can have a little bit more of a leash and more leeway to get out and about and do what you're going to do without having to notify every single move that you make. But yet and still, I don't care how grown you get, I think there is that level that somebody somewhere needs to know where you are. So I just thought I'd throw that in for all of the parents struggling with the children at the age where you're in that battle. And like you said, Maynard, not without correction. And even here, even at the age of 12, Jesus got correction. What was that correction? They take him down to Jerusalem, and we don't hear any more about Jesus. We hear that he grew. He grew in favor and stature with God and man. He grew in wisdom and knowledge. And part of that is you have to know your timing to step out on your own. You have to know your timing in so many different areas and so many different ways before you just launch out and start doing stuff where you may still need to grow. I think that particularly if we look at elements of the church, I think the destruction and the pitfall of the current church is that a lot of people, even in leadership of ministry, did not understand the concept of the scripture that says, and he that ministers, let him wait, W-A-I-T, on his ministry. And I do believe that's a scripture. And it is. And I think that we're more so in a day and time now where everybody has a free reign to just run off half-cocked, whether you've got any instruction, whether you've got any understanding, more than your own. And I want to interject that because sometimes people have understanding, but as the Bible says, every man's ways are right in his own eyes. So obviously you get out and you're doing, I'm sure Jesus being in the temple, wowing the people that were there was right in his eyes as a 12-year-old child. Or even a 12-year-old, even if you want to take him as an adult, but still just at the very beginning, just like I say, as far as graduation and commencement, we understand that when those children walk across that stage and get that diploma, it's a beautiful thing to get the diploma, and it is commencement, but commencement means beginning. You are not fully accomplished. You're only at the starting line. So, anybody want to have some input on that? The difference between having arrived and achieved and just being at the starting line.
I would like to just add that in Palestinian time, or in the time of the Bible, I don't know that they had bar mitzvahs yet. When I read up about it, it said they started around 1500. However, even the word bar mitzvah means son of the covenant. So this is the point at which a Jewish male, usually age 13, is responsible as a son of the Jewish covenant with God. So Jesus is recognizing that now I have responsibility in my community as a Jewish male person. And so he goes and starts basically researching, what do they have to say about this covenant that I'm now responsible for. Now, the other thing that struck me is that after Joseph and Mary found him, the word says he went with them and was subject to them. So even though he knows, number one, who he is, and number two, that he is now in the social terms a son of the covenant, that he has personal responsibility, he still doesn't buck up and say, I'm doing my thing and, you can't tell me what to do. He's subject to them and continues to grow. I think that's very important.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And thank you for bringing that out, because I wasn't aware of that myself. And so it makes sense then that his question, "Wist ye not that I should be about my Father's business?" Why are you shocked when I'm basically doing what in his mind, he felt like, as you said, seeking and searching out the knowledge of what is this all about. And since I'm now responsible for the covenant, and let's go there. Let me take a detour right there for just a second. How many times do we not stop to actually find out what we're responsible for? In any real sense of the way. You know what I'm saying? We'll join organizations and have no idea what we're responsible for. We'll be in society and have no idea what we're responsible for. We go on jobs, and it used to be at the job, they would tell you what you were responsible for. But now, honey, they'll just throw you out there to the dogs and the sharks. Right. And you still don't know what you're responsible for, and they expect you to perform with absolutely no knowledge of what you're responsible for. You'll have people that take on ministries and other things with absolutely no idea of stopping to take the time to search out, okay, what is it that you want me to do? And I think we also have to, with that, look at leadership and say, number one, let's go to a place, and I'm saying leadership in any area. I'm not just talking about church. I'm talking about life. As a matter of fact, I feel like church post-COVID-19 is going to be so different than anything that we've ever seen if you're actually in the flow. and by that, I mean, this COVID-19 is squeezing out new wine. And some folks are going to still try to put it in old skins, but baby, them old skins going to burst. It's not going to be able to hold it, I guarantee you. So when we look at the whole element of what all is involved, I think that leadership has to come to a point, whether it's my job, whether it's I'm leading in the home, whether it's in my community or whatever, we have to go back to the old times, days, and ways of giving, at least, if I'm not explaining to you what this covenant entails, at least put something in my hands that I can read it, learn it, and discover it on my own. I do understand there's a responsibility on the part of the individual, but I'm trying to really kind of bring in the idea that it's not just a matter of the responsibility of the individual, but I think we need to go back to old time, I don't say old time ways. I think we need to go back to being responsible, to be the ones in leadership. Whenever we're launching out, even in the new things that are getting ready to come forward, I feel like we need to be responsible, even in the new, and especially in the new, if we're bringing people into a new place. And that's really what the whole element of talking about being apostolic. It is those that go before, and you're boldly going where no man has gone before. But then somebody needs to explain to the followers the responsibilities and what all is involved and attached to that covenant, especially if it's new, because we're going someplace we haven't gone before. Somebody's got to have some vision, and somebody's got to lead the way. Do you guys agree with that? I mean, what are your feelings or thoughts regarding that?
I believe that's very true. You have to share the vision. People have to understand your vision in order for all of us to pull in the same direction.
But I think part of that is, like we were saying back in those days, I mean, they were getting married at 15 and 16, 14, 15, 16. So he made it to 12. So he's thinking, you know, I'm almost there where I can do my own thing. Like she said, flex my muscles, flex whatever. So a lot of times when people come fresh out of the seminary, they feel like, hey, I've got the knowledge, they've got the zeal, and I'm ready to go out there and I'm ready to do whatever needs to be done, which is all fine and good. And she said they still haven't learned the structure. So I think it's good to even recognize that even Jesus had to learn some structure. So that's where Mama came back and said, you know, why would you do this? You know, if we can have the knowledge, we can have the zeal, but if we can't follow instructions and know what the structure is, we all have some kind of leadership that needs to be followed. So I think that was also part in that lesson, that because I remember someone said, he wasn't lost, he knew where he was. Well, he knew where he was, but he still had people that were responsible for him at that time. And when you have people that are responsible for you, you need to answer to them until you get your oath and you out there at 14, 15, 16, and you are actually on your own. That's another story. But at that point, you had people that were still responsible for you, and they needed to know where you are. And I think that's a lesson in itself. Now, if Jesus needed to learn now he knew what he was there for. He knew the word. That's why the scribes, they were mesmerized by how this little boy gonna tell us all this. He know better more than we do. And sometimes, and we do say knowledge is power, but knowledge is not power if you don't know the structure. It can be destructive if you don't have it that way.
Because knowledge is dynamite, and dynamite in the wrong hands is destructive. Dynamite in the right hands is constructive. Mm-hmm. So I want to delve a little bit more, because both of you are playing with that term subject too. And it does say he was subject to them. Now, I want to get some input, because I think we've seen and lived both ends of the pendulum, at least in my day. We had and grew up under a system where being subject to was like another form of slavery, and you couldn't ask why, because I said so. It was so many things that just be subject to me. And I'm not saying, because I said so maybe isn't a matter of learning how to be subject to. Don't ask me 10,000 questions, just do what I said do. But then a lot of it was, really unnecessary, but it was the way the individuals believe. So, hey, we'll flow with that. We'll go with that. But then all the way to, and I'm gonna bring this to COVID-19, all the way to that generation of people, my parents' age, who, when preachers told them, go to church during COVID-19 and defy the orders of the health department, we saw these individuals going to, because this is being subject to. And I heard frustration from those individuals' children who were frustrated because they were trying to tell their parents, no, you don't have to be subject to that. You don't have to go. But there was that conflict, because this is the way they had been indoctrinated and trained. Truly, I mean, for real, this isn't a game. So then you had these seniors going out and getting sick because they've been trained so heavily in the being subject to. To the flip side of that, to a generation beneath me, or I'll say younger than me, I'm not saying beneath in a negative way, who they're like, you don't tell me what to do. You don't tell me nothing. You not gonna tell me, I mean, I don't care what it is. Even if it's for my well-being, there is that polar opposite group that came a generation behind us, who subject to is a complete dirty phrase. So how do we find the balance between those two? Because I've seen and witnessed both extremes in my lifetime, both of which become extremely unhealthy.
Both extremes are unhealthy. What I think is healthy, unfortunately, we quash a lot. Growing up, I think my parents thought of me as a rebellious child compared to my sisters. But I really was not trying to be rebellious. Most of the time, I was just trying to ask the reasons why, so I can understand what is it that you are, if you're restricting me from doing something, why is that? Is there something I should be aware of, so that if I come upon this situation again, I'll know what to avoid? That really was my desire to learn. But for them, they saw it as a challenging their authority. And so they really did not like that and felt like I was being rebellious. Well, even in the word, God tells Israel, come now, let us reason together. If somebody is trying to understand then we as a community, I feel, have a responsibility to make things plain for them. You don't want people out there just, turn right, walk 3 steps, turn left, walk 1 step. You don't want people just following that sort of instruction without understanding purpose behind it.
Yes.
And that's one of the things even that struck me about this little vignette of Jesus's life. Mary and Joseph have gone, they said, a whole day's journey before they actually start looking for him. So now they've got to return back a day's journey to get back to Jerusalem. And it says they look for him for 3 days. So we're talking about the better part of a week that this 12-year-old child is out there. And as a mother, I'm thinking, you're concerned about, is somebody taking advantage of him? Is he okay? Has he eaten? Where is he able to sleep? All of that.
Yeah.
And then this is kind of off to the side, but if you allow me, their imagination, of course, is going wild, because where could this child be for this long? And we're looking for him and we haven't found him. And Jesus's response to them when he does find them is that, didn't you know that I would be about my Father's business? And basically what he is saying, the way it struck me, let me put it that way. You got all these things going in your imagination about where I might be. But Jesus is saying, let your imagination be consistent with who I am and what I came for. This is the anointed one and his anointing. He is the Son of God, and he came to be the Redeemer. So if you know those things, which they didn't understand at the time, but if you know those things, then a lot of those imaginations that you have about where I might be would be ruled out just from the very beginning, because that's not who I am and that's not what I came for.
And it's interesting that you said that, because my mind went to, why were they so panicked? When I think about it, I'm thinking because they do know he's the Son of God. Because Joseph for sure knew that it wasn't his seed, and Mary knew she hadn't been with anybody. So if you stop and think about it, you're like, in my mind, I was like the panic of, oh my God, God gave me something so precious. I mean, he gave me his son, and I done lost him, Jesus. I done lost him.
Right.
And so, we're talking about even the parable of the woman that tore up her house because she had lost a penny, and the pearl of great price, and all those stories about things getting lost in the house. I'm just like, I cannot imagine what Mary and Joseph were feeling panic-wise, because they knew he was the Son of God. And then you get, and that to me sometimes speaks to our ministry. Sometimes we know God has given us something, and we are like, oh my goodness, I think I lost it somewhere. And we get into this absolute panic of, oh my God, where did I lose it? I know he gave it to me, but oh my goodness, I just don't even know where to look for that. And even, I'm gonna say that for a lot of us that were raised in the dogmatic tradition of backsliding and you're gonna miss the mark and all of that, how many times do we get in that place and phase where we make some choices that maybe were not the best choices, but they were the choices that we made for our lives? And I'm not even gonna say they were the wrong choices, because the steps are ordered, but anyway, that whole element of maybe they were not the best choices, and we get into that fearful panic of, I done lost Jesus. And where am I going to find him at, Lord? Where am I going to find him at? I done lost him by the way. And I've been searching for him. And I can't tell you how many times I talk to quote unquote backsliders, and they get stuck in that, I lost him somewhere along the way and I just can't find him. I can't get back to him. And in the reality of it, it was an experience for them to have with him. But I guess I want to speak to that panic and why we have that panic, because we realize really how precious God is. But to put that panic and fear to the side is to understand he doesn't leave us and he doesn't forsake us and he doesn't just disappear into thin air, no matter how many choices we feel like we made that were off. You know what I'm saying?
True.
And then even the identifying your gifts and callings are without repentance. And even though we hear it so many times in a negative way, my thing is, if you understand God gave you something to bring forth in this world and he's not going to take it back. You're not gonna have to go hunting for Jesus, and you left him somewhere, lost him somewhere along the way. Mm-hmm. So that's a whole nother can of worms. That was a very, very good point. Nita, were you getting ready to say something?
If I wasn't for that, let's go on.
Okay. Well, now, I'm going to go here, and I'm a detour here on purpose because I'm going back to subject 2, and so I have no problem with identifying that I am most disturbed and appalled by the most recent events in the Black community that we've been plagued with, because I'm still going to the subject 2. I'm still dealing with the subject 2 concept. Okay, so here we have an individual that we saw have the life choked out of him. And with the idea that he was resisting. And so we always hear the subject 2. And I feel like this is a relevant conversation because we have Black sons, we have Black husbands, we have Black fathers, we have uncles, grandsons, whatever you want to put in there. And I think this is something that needs to be addressed when you start talking about being subject to, because I think sometimes even within our culture, we will teach subject to almost like our parents were taught subject to in the way of religion and church. And sometimes the subject to still has an issue as to at what point do you stop being subject to? Or, and let me put in here, first and foremost, the gentleman, and I'll say his name, George Floyd, was subject to the police officers. So, you know, he was subject to. The point of being subject to that I also want to bring in here, it's multifaceted. I read a post by a person of privilege who said that everybody that was standing there watching is complicit to the crime because they did nothing. And of course, again, I am going to say it was a person of privilege and, you know, who obviously did not understand that the same way they were choking the life out of George Floyd, had they tried to intervene, they could have very easily had the life choked out of them as well. And so, you know, I understand you don't understand our dilemma. And so for reasons, even though it was being recorded, thank God, or we wouldn't even have the conversations that we're having about him. It would be all swept under the rug, but it was recorded. But even in its recording, it did not guarantee that if any of those onlookers decided not to be subject to, that they were not going to experience dire circumstances. So the question to me that I want to pose is, at what level does subject to need to be broken and or draw the line?
Well, my sister had a great thing when she was telling me what she taught her boys. And the simple thing of, if you ever get stopped by the police, you put your hands on the dash, make sure they see your hands at all times. But there were 4 guidelines that she gave them. This is as far as I go. Now, that way they were still in compliance, but I'm not going to just give you all my tea and then you're going to lie about it later on or change whatever I said later on. In the instance on yesterday, he did comply. There wasn't resistance, even though they claimed there was. And I don't know how you call the police on a possible fraud. I don't know what that could have been. Or forgery, I apologize. But the thing is, when there was a African-American young man who was asking him, man, why don't you do this? Why don't you get off? You know, he's not resisting this. When he did get closer to the one officer who was standing guard, because there was 3 other ones on the young man's body. He's standing guard, and he was, man, he approached that young man, and then said, man, I'll do this. There was a young lady who was there who was not African American, and she was like, but I'm witnessing you approached him. He didn't approach you. You approached him. So as far as the guidelines in this instance, unfortunately, those guidelines didn't work because they filmed it, which, as you stated, was a good thing. But I think, since we know this is a problem, we do need to have some kind of guidelines to know how we're going to face it, because when we get blindsided by these instances, we tend to go off at the handle. Just like the young man that was trying to be accused that he was agitating her in the park. He remained calm, and he already knew, this is how I'm going to handle this. It's a good thing I got my camera. And when she called the police, he was like, thank you for calling the police. And I'm done, because now my case is made. So it's tragic that the young man passed away, that we watched his life just literally be taken away. So we're not saying that they're always going to work, but we can at least prepare them ahead of time for what may happen. And then that's as far as I could think of. I admired the fact that she even gave her sons a plan of, you do these 4 things. After you do those 4 things, the next, all you really need to do is contact me, and then I'll take it from there. So I thought that was admirable. I don't know how else to apply it to what happened on yesterday, other than he was asking questions like, okay, man, and he did comply. I just don't know what anyone else could have done to help him, because the young lady got closer to the police officer. She got to take closer pictures of the incident than the young man who was African American, and they were like, don't come any closer. That right there is a privilege as well.
True. Thank you.
No, I don't know. As a Black man, I'm still that situation was just totally unacceptable. The young man had complied. He was subject. I mean, what else can you do when you're handcuffed? They had him sitting down. They decided that wasn't enough. They put him on his face. I'm almost of a mind to where maybe we need to deal with the mindset of by any means necessary. If we're standing around and we see things like that, we might need to step in. It might cost us some lumps and some pain, but maybe it'll save somebody's life. You can only stick a dog, you can poke at a dog for so long before he's ready to react. And maybe violence isn't the answer, but we need to come up with some way that people will realize that this is not acceptable. We can't have this.
So in that given circumstance, you would agree with those that felt like they should have, I'm talking about the onlookers, should have resisted the officers and taken action and definitely the officers were telling them to stand back and this and that and the other. So are you saying in that instance to not comply and not be subject to, for the sake of saving the individual's life? Because there were potentially more onlookers as time went by than there were police officers. Notwithstanding, I'm sure the police officers would have shot them dead and then said that, you know, they were being attacked. But, you know.
It's a tough nut, but I'm thinking that you have your hands up. You're stepping in, putting your body in that way. Maybe one of the officers or the officer, even the one who was sitting on the guy's neck with his hands in his pocket, might have gotten up. Maybe if you nudged him, had your hands up, it might cost you some lumps, but there are enough people on looking. Hopefully somebody would feel the same way and try to help.
I hear you. I just feel their level of hatred and violence, and I'm talking about the police officers, was at a level they was just shot to kill, and it wouldn't even have been a struggle, because they had hatred in their heart to begin with. Yes, Sheila, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I agree with the sentiment, but as a strategy, these people are armed and trained in hand-to-hand combat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're armed not only with guns, but with other weapons as well. And so, you know, you walking down the street, you're not carrying any weapons most of the time. You're not trained in hand-to-hand combat. So I think trying to take them on physically in that moment, while I understand the sentiment, and I actually may have been tempted to do so myself while they're killing a person, but I think that the larger picture requires that we organize as a community, that we figure out strategically where we can best make an impact with direct action. And I agree that this has to stop by any means necessary. But unless I've got snipers up on the on the roofs of the buildings around, the strategic problem is that these people are armed, and not only armed physically, but armed in the sense that they're going to write the report. Just like they lied in the report and said that he was resisting and blah, 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 this and that, and we noticed that he had some medical distress. All of that is a lie. But you're the one that gets to write the report. And had it not been for video that was available to the general public, that would have been the final word about what happened.
Exactly.
Now, I noticed that you wrote the phone number down so we could contact someone directly about the tragedy and how unfair it is. Maybe part of the strategy is that we actually have a direct number to the police commissioner so we can report his men what they're doing. One of those, one is filming, one is making the 911 call. Right after that, then you're gonna call the commissioner. I've called 911 on three of your police officers who are laying on this man, and it needs to be dealt with before he loses his life. Maybe that would be a strategy to where we would have direct contact numbers to these people, the commissioner, the mayor, whoever could really make that decision. Y'all need to get off that man, because they definitely not gonna listen to the people standing around there. That's, and I know your city council people, those people that don't answer their phone, then you don't call them, you call somebody else, call the police commissioner. The phone will be answered. I think that with those kind of connections, and then with us knowing who we can connect is another issue as well, that's going to actually answer the phone calls and respond to our cry for help.
You know what? I just want to elaborate on what she was saying about him stepping on his neck. I definitely think the police need to do something different with their techniques, because him having his knee in his back would have did the exact same thing that him having his knee in his neck would have did, and it would have restrained him without cutting off his airway. It was rude and it's disrespectful, and that's not even humane. Period. It's not humane. You wouldn't do your dog like that or a cat like that, but we can do human beings like that. It's wrong. It's wrong.
And so ultimately, I think that in my mind, going specifically to the question of being subject to, and the fact that Jesus was subject to them, even when I look at, and I've had these conversations many times with partners and couples, and the whole idea of submit and who you will submit to. And I contend you can only really submit to those that really genuinely love you.
Yeah.
And have care and concern for you. And I'm kind of interchanging submit and the idea of subject to. I think that at the point in time that you realize that these people have no care for you in any way, shape, or form, I think at that point, again, at some place we have to draw a line and be able to draw a line. And I think particularly I'm going to say with regard to our Black men, because the Black males are being, not that it's not happening to us, Sheila and I both had an experience coming back from a graduation in southern Missouri where we got pulled over on a bogus cop. So it's not just gender driven, but definitely our Black males are being disproportionately affected and abused and onslaught, if you will. And so I think we have to try to get people to understand at the point in time that you realize somebody does not have your best interest and your welfare at heart, I believe that that is the point at which I no longer need to submit or be subject to you.
Absolutely.
When you show me that you have no care, no compassion, and no love for me as a person and a human being, I no longer need to be subject to you. Now, watch this. That's not just with the police officer, but to me, that goes for members of churches that got god-awful pastors.
Yeah.
That goes for, I mean, any level of authority that you want to talk about, because that is part of the abuse cycle, that they get to abuse you freely and you're supposed to be subject to them. And I think, again, you can only, the reason why Jesus was able to be subject to Mary and Joseph was because he knew, even as the Son of God, he knew that Mary and Joseph loved him and they had his best interest at heart.
Gotcha.
So he was able to be subject to them. Had it been that, and that's exactly why God chose them to be his parents here on earth, was because they had the capacity. And understand this, everybody doesn't have the capacity to love.
Amen. Amen.
They had the capacity to love him as the Son of God and give him everything that he needed without fail, without reservation, without restriction. They were willing, ready, and able to give Jesus everything he needed to fulfill his role as the Son of God here on earth. Son of man, Son of God. Again, I'm going to say it one more time. If I am unable to know, and you have shown me by your actions that you do not care for me and you don't have love for me as a human being, I no longer need to submit to you.
Period.
That's good.
Period.
Because if you do not have love for me as a human being, and you do not have love for me as a person, you will not do what's in my best interest.
That's right.
Period. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And I think we need to start teaching this to our Black boys.
Yes.
I think we need to teach it to our Black girls. I think we
Amen.
need to teach it wherever we can to people that are being taken advantage of by people with authority who could care diddly squat about them. I think we need to teach it all the way across the board. I don't care if you in Bishop so-and-so's church. I don't care if you're at a job. I don't care where you are. If the authority and leadership, if it's the police, whoever it is, if the authority and the leadership shows me you do not love me and you do not have care for me as a human being, I do not have to be. There you go. Throw up your two. Throw up your two.
That's right. That's good. That's
Not
good.
have to be subject to you.
That's it.
Now, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. That's my 2 cents. But I do believe it's spiritual in concept. Because if you're not gonna love me even in a partnership marriage relationship, and you've shown me over and over again that you don't love me and you don't care about me, I do not have, and as the Bible says, submit one to another. I'm not gonna be subject to anybody or anything that does not love me.
Right.
Hallelujah. Mhm.
And I think that's a place that we need an adjustment. Jesus was subject to them. He went down to Jerusalem. He stayed and was, or really I should say up to Nazareth. They went back to Nazareth. But he went back to where his parents were, stayed with them, was under their tutelage, followed their complete instruction, grew and developed. And my brain is still on up and down, but it was actually down. He stayed under their tutelage and instruction until he had flourished and grown into everything he needed to be. At that point, we see Jesus later on, and we'll get to it, when his mother wants to have amnesia about his manhood and the development and maturity of himself in his ministry. And he looks at her and says, who are my mother? Who are my brethren? Who is my mother? Who are my brethren? Because at this point, you try to inquire and call me in to check, and I ain't there no more. So again, we will progress to that level, and we will progress to that place. But we never see, even up to the time when he's hanging on the cross, and his concern, Joseph is already dead, and his concern is for his mother, and he wants to know that his mother is taken care of. Never in his earthly life does he show disrespect to his mother.
That's right. That's right.
Never in his life, whether it was him at 12, whether it was him at 33, never do we see him being disrespectful to his mother. So, but he knew she loved him.
Yeah.
He knew Joseph loved him. That's what he could be subject to. You can only be subject to love.
All right.
Amen.
You said something there.
Hey,
Yeah.
hey. Anything else that anybody else wants to bring into a discussion before we close out for the day?
On a slightly different note, I think you had left a question on the table last week.
Yes.
And my question would be, was Jesus a Nazarene or a Nazarite? Or was he both?
Come on.
I know that he was a citizen of Nazareth, which would make him a Nazarene. But he was called and set apart. And he committed himself to a goal, which I think made him a Nazarite. So in my mind, he was both.
He was. So there was a vow that you took, and they had different, they didn't cut their hair, different things about them they didn't partake of. Even interesting, we'll get into that when we get to the crucifixion, but them giving them the vinegar and the hyssop, the wine element, and so many different things the Nazarite did not partake of. And so every Nazarene was not a Nazarite, but there was a vow of being a Nazarite that was a sacred vow. It was a sacred oath. So that was something that was exclusive to people that took that vow. Very good. Very good. Good job. I love it, Pastor. I love it. And did anybody find that in your research as well?
My husband researched that for me. That was really cool.
One research covers all.
That's right. He was the head of the house. That's right.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay, so that's going to bring us to an end and take us to the close on today. Any other questions? Any other comments that open? I've enjoyed you guys immensely today, and this is good stuff.
I enjoyed seeing everybody.
It is a blessing seeing everybody.
Yeah.
I'm very, very, what's the word? Full, I guess, because of that last nugget that you can only be subject to love. That is one of the things that if Lord gives me strength and ability and opportunity, that even with my grandchildren, you know, I'm gonna make sure that you understand.
Yes.
You only be subject to love.
Yeah.
Yes, that was a great nugget.
Right.
And we're going to close with that today because that's a powerful takeaway. And I hope that we embrace it with everything that's in us. And come on, teach it to everybody that you know. And particularly when it starts talking about being subject to people, that's the only thing I can be subject to is love. So God bless you guys. I love you so much.
Love you.
Love you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.